So another point I ought to mention here is that the way you react to an object of devotion depends on its form, and if it's made by man, it depends on the state of life of the person who makes it or creates it. So, to give an example of this, you could take a painting by an artist. If an artist is angry when he paints, if he's a person who is seething with frustrated anger, perhaps at the state of the world, he will produce a picture that makes us either angry or frightened. That's presuming, of course, he's a great artist. If a sculptor is hammering out something from stone, what he produces will reflect his state of life. If he is in a mood of rapture as he does it, this statue will convey that mood. If he's in an unbelievable state of peace and tranquility, the same thing will happen. His work of art, or what he creates, will reflect the state of life that he's in exactly. So we talked about the 10 worlds in the first lecture, the 10 basic states of life. These states of life, such as hell, hunger, anger, and so on, can all be conveyed through the creativity of the person in that state. So, for instance, even a statue of the Buddha, if it's in gold, could reflect, perhaps, the world of hunger, the world of desiring things. A statue of the Buddha reclining can probably reflect tranquility. Likewise, if you look at a picture or at a statue of Christ on the cross, it probably will reflect guilt. This will depend, of course, on the state of life of the person who makes that object. So Nichiren Daishonin's purpose, his prime purpose, was to produce an object of devotion which reflected his Buddha state, the state of Buddhahood which he had achieved, so that anyone looking at it would find that it would gradually bring out the Buddha state in them. This is the purpose of the Gohonzon, to bring the Buddha state into the foremost position in our lives through devoting ourselves or practicing to or looking at the Gohonzon which Nichiren Daishonin himself inscribed. So when he inscribed the Gohonzon, he said, I am inscribing my life in sumi ink, which was the ink they used in Japan to do their calligraphy, so that you can believe with your whole heart. I am inscribing my life so that you can believe with your whole heart. He inscribed in the Buddha state himself his life so that we can draw that same state out of our own lives. So you may say, how can a piece of paper do such a thing? After all, it's a piece of paper and it's covered with a lot of Chinese characters. How can it possibly draw anything out of me? But the fact is that pieces of paper can draw incredible things out of one, can't they? We've already mentioned a picture by an artist which can draw anger or rapture or whatever mood you can think of out of people. A pound note brings something out of us, doesn't it? Still a piece of paper. If we walk round a corner and pick up a 20-pound note, it draws something even more fantastic out of us. But it's still a piece of paper. If we get a letter from our girlfriend and it contains marvelous, romantic, exciting language just as we'd hoped for, it draws fantastic rapture out of us. But if she says, "I'm finished with you, you're a so-and-so," it can put us straight into hell. So a piece of paper is incredibly powerful. It reflects the life state of the person who uses it, creates it. And Nichiren Daishonin, when he inscribed the Gohonzon, was in the Buddha state. And therefore, it reflects the Buddha state to anyone who devotes themselves to it. And each high priest, down through the ages, has inherited not only that right, but that ability to inscribe a Gohonzon in the Buddha state so that it draws the Buddha state out of us. So you may say, how do I know the high priest was in the Buddha state when he did it? The answer is, of course, you get the actual proof. The Gohonzons never fail. And from the very moment you start to practice to a Gohonzon, you begin to see change in your life. So in order to decide on how he was going to produce this object of devotion, Nichiren Daishonin, of course, had spent many years studying all the Buddhist teachings that he could lay his hands on in Japan. And as I explained in a previous lecture, in the process of doing that, he realized totally in his life that the Lotus Sutra was supreme, just as Shakyamuni himself, who had taught the Lotus Sutra, stated at that time. So Nichiren Daishonin took the Gohonzon, as it were, out of the manuscript of the Lotus Sutra. And in that way, he was able to substantiate the flow of Buddhism down through the ages from Shakyamuni to himself. So in the Lotus Sutra, there is a chapter in which an extraordinary ceremony is described. It's known as the ceremony of the air. A-I-R, not H-E-I-R. Ceremony of the air. And in this ceremony, which I'm not going to go into detail now, but in this ceremony, an incredible great treasure tower appeared. This treasure tower, as it's called, was vast. And it was encrusted with jewels and gems and was the most beautiful object you can imagine. And after some time, as this ceremony developed, it was seen that there was a Buddha sitting in the center of this treasure tower. This Buddha's name is Taho, T-A-H-O, and he is a legendary Buddha, a Buddha whose name represents one of the great principles of Buddhism, which again I'll come to in a moment. And after a little while, Shakyamuni was there sitting beside him. And finally, 4 great bodhisattvas appeared and presented themselves to these 2 Buddhas sitting in this treasure tower. And furthermore, countless other bodhisattvas rose up out of the earth and assembled in masses and masses round this great treasure tower. So this was a figurative means which Shakyamuni used in order to explain the flow of Buddhism into the future. Shakyamuni Buddha, in that treasure tower, represented the wisdom, the subjective wisdom that exists in every one of us, the wisdom arising from the Buddha state. Tahoe Buddha represents the good fortune that people can draw into their lives from outside them through the qualities of wisdom and compassion in the Buddha state. And those four great bodhisattvas that came and presented themselves in front of the treasure tower represent the most wonderful qualities which each human being innately has in his or her life. So the people who arose out of the earth around are you and I, or the bodhisattvas of the earth who inherit Buddhism and chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, if you decide to do so. So the meaning of this story is that Shakyamuni and Tahoe, the two Buddhas who were in that treasure tower, representing all the greatness of the Buddha state, the Buddha state which exists in every human being, the wisdom on the one side and the ability to draw good fortune to your life through elevating the Buddha state in you, were joined by the four great bodhisattvas who were the leaders of all these bodhisattvas of the earth. And in the process of the ceremony, they transferred the heritage to the greatest of those leaders, whose name was Jogyo. So Jogyo, the leader of the bodhisattvas of the earth, inherited the law which the treasure tower represented, the law of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And it was the task of all those bodhisattvas, greater, the sutra says, than all the sands of 10,000 Ganges rivers, or words to that effect, were the people who, in due course of time, in the age of Mappo, which is the age that began around 900 or 1000 AD, would inherit this law, passing it on to each other one by one. So I wanted to just explain that to you because that is, as it were, the historical background to the design of the Gohonzon. It lives, in other words, in the whole history and flow of Buddhism. So on a piece of paper here, which is rather difficult to see, I'm sorry about that, is a sort of idea of what a Gohonzon looks like. So for those of you who have never seen a Gohonzon, remember it's on a piece of paper. The Gohonzons we have in our own home are probably about that length, though other Gohonzons that are in temples or community centers may be 3 or even 5 feet high. And on this Gohonzon, to the left and right of Nam-myoho Renge Kyo down the center, you have at the top there the names Shakyamuni and Tahoe. So there on the left is all the wisdom of the Buddha state represented through that character for Shakyamuni. And on the right, through the Chinese character for Tahoe, is all the good fortune of the universe which can be drawn from outside you into your life. And all around those characters and around the words Nam-myoho Renge Kyo down the center are many, many, many other Chinese characters. And as it says there, these are the characters which show, for example, the 10 basic states of life, which we talked about in the first lecture, from hell at its worst to Buddhahood at its greatest. And also all the forces of the universe, the forces that affect our lives, either adversely or advantageously, depending upon whether we are following a positive and wise course in life or not. So the sun is a great force of the universe, a great creator. The sun is on the Gohonzon. The moon, stars, and many other forces that are not so easy to describe. You remember, as one example I gave you, the force that stops you on the edge of the pavement and prevents you from going further, and a motorcycle passes you at 80 miles an hour and misses you by an inch. All these many and varied forces that work in order to protect our lives, provided we are moving in a positive direction, are depicted on the Gohonzon. There too are those four great bodhisattvas, the four great bodhisattvas which represent life force and purity, justice, and compassion, putting it very briefly. The qualities that are so great in human life and which we all contain. They're across the top. The other characters include not only light, brightness, but also darkness. Devadatta, the cousin of Shakyamuni Buddha, who tried to kill him on several occasions and constantly frustrated Shakyamuni's plans, is on the Gohonzon. A female demon called Kishimoji, who had 10 daughters and a very devouring nature until she promised to work with the law and not against it, is also there. Devadatta lives in every one of us. Every one of us has that devilish instinct inside us. If we didn't have it, how could there be wars? Kishimojin also lives in us. Kishimojin, who, rather than see her babies starve, fed them with other people's children. We all have such an instinct in us. Even though it's not in charge of us, it's there. Sometimes it can appear, that possessive, strongly possessive, jealous nature. So this Gohonzon that we have is the most incredible thing. Every aspect of life, every shade and color of it is represented by those Chinese characters. And of course, a Chinese character in itself is a whole story. This is why they're probably the most economical method of writing and conveying ideas that have ever has existed in the history of the world. Each Chinese ideogram conveys so much that people could write a book on each one of them. So the Gohonzon, as Nichiren Daishonin said, described his life as a human being. His life, which he was perfectly well aware, contained good and bad, darkness and light, shadows and brightness. He wanted to give an object of devotion to which everyone could relate. Whether at the moment they got down in front of it, they were in the world of hell, or anger, or rapture. He didn't want to produce an object of devotion that someone would only find himself dying with shame to, in guilt and misery. asking for forgiveness. He wanted to produce an object of devotion which, even though one might feel miserable and ashamed, you could practice to and realize that you were nothing unusual, that the devilish worlds and states that exist in oneself also exist in your neighbors and in everybody else around you. And most important of all, in the Buddha, who is also a human being. But then, taking his brush and his sumi ink, he inscribed down the center of it all, in great bold characters, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo Nichiren. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo Nichiren. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo being the expression, as we discovered last week, of the Buddha's state in words. All the incredible qualities of that state contained in the phrase Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And to emphasize the point, he put Nichiren at the base. Nichiren, the human being, but Nichiren, who was also enlightened. So, of course, this is a very difficult thing to take in a lecture like this, in a comparatively short time. But I want to now, having described the Gohonzon itself, even if only briefly, to explain to you a little bit about how it works. In Nichiren Buddhism, there are three practices. One is to perform gongyo, which is reciting the sutra, and chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo in front of the Gohonzon. And the second practice is to teach others about Buddhism. Third practice is to study. Study not in the sense of academic study, but to read the writings of Nichiren Daishonin and the explanations and guidance on those writings in order to understand the full spirit and meaning. So, through a combination of these three practices, one begins to understand more and more what Nichiren Daishonin's life was like. You begin to understand his qualities, his courage, the breadth and depth and width and height of his wisdom, his incredible compassion, even against enemies who were hounding him throughout his life, and many other characteristics. And through this study and the picture you get of Nichiren Daishonin, so the characters on that Gohonzon, or if you like, the Gohonzon as a whole, begins to more and more live in your life. When you first look at the Gohonzon, you think, oh yes, it's rather beautiful. You know, it's a paper with all these beautiful Chinese characters on it. But as you go on practicing to it, day after day, month after month, year after year, so each of those characters begin to live in your life.